Hey there, and welcome to Calm Unity. Let's have a chat. Today we're having a chat with a very good friend of mine, Ruben Els. Now Ruben communicates in the world of architecture, more specifically residential. He helps people design their very own personal homes. And this fascinated me. So I got to pick his brain a little, some of the design process, some of the do's and don'ts, and the intimate personal connection that needs to be made to get this done. So let's dive right in and have a chat. So you focus in residential, right? And you build people their personal homes, right?
Yes. And I love that part of my job.
Why? And how do you approach someone building something like that that's so personal and such a big risk? How do you communicate what they need in architecture?
Well, I mean, that takes a lot of time. So the way that sort of process gets started is I go and meet with the client in their existing home where they are living now. So I get to a bit of an understanding of what their expectations are in terms of a home and how they live in the current space that they enjoy. And then that meeting is just purely about collecting information. So before I set up any of these meetings with the client, I'll give them a mandate to go and collect as much reference work, things they like, if it's a specific tile, if it seems the smallest little detail insignificant, just bring it along. Any bit of information that I can collect from them helps put together a bigger picture that I'm later on then going to represent back to them. So the first meeting is always, I listen. My communication part to the first meeting is so minimal, but I need to collect that information from them all the time. If they're going to go through this long ordeal of designing and building their own home, they've already been collecting information for the last year on it. So when you ask them to share that information, they get extremely excited. Sometimes it's overwhelming and it becomes a little bit much. They communicate to me. That's the first step. I sit and listen, I put up my document, and then I'll go home. I normally think on it a day or two, and then I start putting together a map, a plan for how we're going to get as much of what they want into action.
Yeah, like you said, they have their own ideas, right? And these are scattered ideas from different sources and maybe even different styles.
Conflicting ideas.
Absolutely. And how do you thin down those ideas? How do you unscramble all of those to kind of get to the fundamentals of what you feel? Because obviously you're chucking away single ideas that they liked, but that might not actually work within the bigger picture of what needs to be created.
Okay, so initially my process initially entails the brief. That brief is a wish list. It's what you would like to have. So a lot of the time in the design process, I'm not hitting them with reality yet at all. That first meeting is, what would you guys like? Obviously there's a budget in mind, and I hope they have the smarts to realize that beforehand, and sometimes that the very next meeting becomes a hard reality about what their budget entails. So a budget is normally a good place to start, because then I can get a good idea of what they are able to get and how far their wish list is out of reach. So it was an idea that was put to me at university. When you have a project brief with a lot of restraints, half your design work's already done. If you sit down with a client and they've only got 1.2 million rand to build this house, excluding the land parcel, you then have your first restraint that you work with. You then look at the site, you're going to look at orientations, all those sort of things. So a lot of the design process happens without the client. So I think to answer it's a really tricky question, because I don't thin it down with them. I get everything they'd possibly like, and then I show them what's possible.
Okay, so now in architecture, obviously what people also don't always understand is that the building is much more than just keeping the rain out, right? And there's a lot of principles, like we've discussed before, about how a space influences people and how light influences things and how the movement of air and heating and cooling and stuff like that. How do you convey more complex design principles like that to a person who just wants a specific tile or saw something on Pinterest and stuff like that? How do you mold the client into understanding bigger concepts like that?
So you touch on an interesting topic because the medium that I deal with is Paperspace. It's a visual thing. It's the same reason I can't really do a lot of those interactions with a client over the phone. It's nice to be in their space. They're physically showing me imagery that they found, and I'm showing them, whether it be little sketches or drawings, my intent and my idea behind things. So a lot of the time, you need to, your deliverable is a visual thing that has an emotional response. Space is it plays on your emotions. If a ceiling is too low, it makes you feel a certain way. Rooms, dimensions, and proportions make you feel a certain way. So the architectural industry is very much an emotional response. A lot of people walk into a house before they buy and like, oh, I don't like this house. They might not know why, but there's very real reasons why they don't like it. It could be just because it doesn't fit to their personality. It could be something as small as that, but generally there's an emotional response to a building. So what's very difficult to communicate to a client is how the visual that we are working and spending a lot of time on is going to have an emotional response. I, in my head, have built this house, sort of a maze or just a 3D model that I can walk through as best as possible as my imagination allows me to do, and I need to try and pull the client into that same space. This process is very difficult most of the time because they've got an idea in their head and I need to now put that idea on a piece of paper and convey that idea to someone else. And in that process, it's very easy to get, I want to say it's just very easy to miscommunicate in that process. Because I've been taught to do it a certain way as a designer. There's certain ways you talk about describing a space or something, and you could be completely talking on deaf ears. They might not understand anything. And that translates even more so when I'm talking about building plans. So I've produced something in a format that I need to be skilled in using, and at the end of the day, they don't know how to read a building plan. They've never looked at a building plan a day in their life. So a lot of the time, my first meetings are also me explaining how you read a building plan. That's what a door looks like, that's what a window is. This indicates that you can move from this space to that space, and then sometimes that can be very, very challenging because they have no reference. So a lot of clients don't need to or want to know that level of detail, and they expect you to take care of it. But there is a very exciting opportunity to be able to show clients this space, the emotional response that the space is going to have, whether it be by how open it is to a view on your northern side, whether you've got an east and west open access. There's a lot of different ways to get the client on board with your overall idea. But I think the summary of it is you're meant to take responsibility. It's kind of the part of the profession. You're meant to take responsibility for all the little things that they just want it to be good. They just want it to be nice.
Do people care, and do we need to make them care? Because if I understood, like I now understand spaces better because of previous chats with you. And do you see any value in educating people like that to assist you in that design process?
Definitely. I mean, I have to educate them. Like we said earlier, I have to educate them in terms of how to read a building plan because some of them have never done that before. So a lot of the time, there's a principle that I fundamentally have to use in architectural design. The Southern Hemisphere, you want everything to face north. It's the only good sun that we get to utilize, and the way it's shaded in summer and it comes directly in winter is invaluable to make use of. In the first meeting with a client, we generally go through that principle. So there are certain key elements that just my design decisions on an empty parcel of land are informed by X, Y, and Z that the client isn't aware of. So if they're going to, and it depends on the client, I guess, but if they're going to ask, why did we do it like that? Couldn't we do it like that? I mean, I have clients all the time say, can't we put the garage on this side over here? It'll save more space because they've got this idea that they want to put something else over there. But no, we can't put your garage there because it's going to take up all your northern sun on your property. You're not living in your garage. Why do you want good sun on your garage facade? That makes no sense. It's a waste of your space. So I think repeatedly throughout the process, and you as a designer need to be alert and aware of when it's essential to do so, because you can't inform them of everything. You're the professional. You need to understand the whole list of rules that you're trying to adhere to, as well as what is best for the client. So you need to be able to make those decisions for them, but where it is necessary, inform them on why you have done so. And I think that does help in your sales pitch. You throw in all the technical information that you've been taught to add to this thing, and then you come back to them with an idea. They then look at that idea. You verbally, visually, through building plans, through 3D renderings, through drawings, elevations. I mean, sections are my favorite way to explain spaces to people, because they can see how they sort of stack in each other, and you get a height perspective, which a plan loses completely. But any of these sort of mediums are what we use to explain that idea, relay it to the client, and the fear is always that, is he getting what I'm actually saying? Does he understand how it is? Because it is the worst thing when you get on a site, and luckily it's only happened a handful of times, but it happens. I mean, it is a reality of the job. You get on a site with a client and they, we thought this was going to be a little bit wider. Well, we thought this was going to be a little bit higher, because you can say 4 meters, but they've got no idea what 4 meters are. So what I have learned is you can't explain to people the things in the way that I understand them, or the way that a contractor understands them. You've got to explain to the client in a way that they would understand. And once again, going in their own house is a good way to do that, because I've seen the size of the existing living room. We, for a millisecond, had a discussion. Their living room's a little small. They'd like to have a longer couch, or they'd like to, and you've got to learn to pick up on all these little things that they say in that first meeting. That, you know what, if I gave them a nice big open plan lounge and dining room that allows that space to become one, or the lounge can be a little bit bigger, and if they've got a bigger dining room table, the lounge becomes a little bit of flexibility in that design, I tick that box very quickly, and then I can move on to the next design element. So I think you've got to be able to pick up on little signatures that they've put down on what they want, and then use that to inform them on what they need.
Yeah, how would the communication have failed during a process like that? So you now spend time with the client, you got to know them. How, in which scenario would something be missed? Like you said, they don't know what 4 meters look like, even though you presented it on plans or on renders. So is there anything that you've, in your experience, seen that they don't actually get? Like, perhaps they don't read a plan, obviously, like you do, but if...
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a regular one. I mean, that's very often, like, sometimes I'll explain to them, so some clients get very caught up on the size, because they've been teamed up with a contractor that's telling them, look, this is your rate per square meter to build, which is a very inaccurate way to work out the costing of a house. So it becomes my responsibility to assess that sort of thing, that beforehand, to catch that ball before it drops, to tell them, listen, these bedrooms are 3 by 4. That's a very small bedroom. That's 12 squares. I'm sure, because if I look at your existing living space, you'd like bedrooms a little bit bigger than that. Or this is exactly the same size as the bedroom you currently have. Are you sure you still want something that size? My advice is always to take your time with the design process. I can crumple up 300 rolls of paper until we get that thing 100% correct, because that's inexpensive to do compared to construction costs. And at the end of the day, it becomes my responsibility to listen out for these little things that, if I didn't bring up that, listen, that passage is actually too small, how is he going to know? I've designed this thing, I've portrayed this idea that I'm trying to get him to buy into. I need to make sure I pick up all the little things that they could possibly have an issue with later on. And the times I've had communication failure is the times I didn't pick up on one of those things, or something I didn't pick up that he would necessarily have too much of a concern about that. And it becomes your responsibility to do so.
No, that's valuable, yeah, because it sounds like, because you have so many variables, the communication gap comes in when someone focuses on a single one. Like you said, the cost per square. Yeah, it sounds like it's continually your job to widen their view and widen their focus, because it sounds like they could easily be pinpointing one thing or nitpicking on one thing, and obviously not scoping the wider ramification, like you said. And it's interesting to hear that mainly the main communication break there is when people get too focused on a single bit of such a complex thing.
And look, if it's that important to them, there's probably a way for me to figure it out, and I've just got to rework the other 10 things that it would affect. But I think the difficult thing in wanting the client to have such a wide perspective on everything is, if they're trying to take in all of this and all of, they might miss a few of the things that they really want, the things that they've actually. So generally, I try and, I mean, you, as a designer, when you're going through this process, it is your responsibility to inform the client throughout the process. But I think a large amount of that responsibility is is to take it upon yourself to make sure that those things will work, and through your assessment that you'll get it right. And the tricky thing in that is you might not. And I think that's where your success lies.
Okay, so next one. What do you think the future of architecture is? So obviously we're in quite a tricky spot now in the world, right? So we're all going to come out of this whole self-quarantine lockdown kind of situation and stuff. And what do you think could possibly change in how we design homes? Yeah, it's just again on the topic of us all now having been forced into quite into a situation that we've never been used to, at least in our generation and then generations up and below us. We haven't ever been forced to stay at home, and I think a lot of people might come to a realization now that my home's not really a great place to be in. Or that this is an epic place. Why have I ever gone out? Why have I spent my money elsewhere if this is such an oasis that I've developed? Do you think people would start seeing that?
Yeah, I can imagine people would start wanting to have. I can imagine people would maybe want to have certain luxuries at home. They've realized now that it would have been nice to have this during the lockdown or that during the lockdown. Things that might not necessarily have been incorporated in household design. For example, I mean, me and you were talking earlier about your neighbor cutting the grass and rolling it out so they'd have somewhere to play cricket on a type of pitch that they made at home for themselves. People incorporating cricket nets into their homes might be a thought process. Just kitting out the house so you don't necessarily have to leave. But I don't know, architecture has always been about activating people in spaces. You're in your home for certain purposes, and activating public spaces is a great achievement that architecture does. I can't imagine that the architectural industry in any way would want people to live in their houses. We'd be designing virtual reality pods very quickly if that was the case. So I think architecture is a means of designing gathering spaces and utilizing the environment around us as best as possible. So bringing those people together outside of your homes is something I think architecture is always going to try and do. I can't imagine that this would hinder it in any way.
So what other trends are you seeing going forward now in architecture, and how you engage with your clients? So obviously everything's changing, technology and all of that, trends, styles, everything. What would you imagine is changing going forward?
Yeah, so you look at it initially, it was just paper-based. It was drawing. You had to relay your idea, and in the early forms of the profession, it was all by hand. I'm glad I had some formal training in doing it that way. But what's sort of been happening over the last few years that I quite am intrigued by and enjoy is video walkthroughs. So it's 3D models that give you sort of a walk through the house. If you were to walk through the front door and what spaces would sit on what sides, because sometimes the client struggles to read the floor plan so much that is the only tool that you're going to be able to use to get it across to them. So we have so many more mediums already that are available to us to portray these ideas.
Yeah, because that also raises an interesting question. I was chatting to another architect as well, and is there ever a balance between, so when you, even something like a rendering, right? Do you make that as photorealistic as you possibly can, or do you leave it slightly stylized so that you don't have to match that exact 3D without any imperfections and stuff like that? How do you balance that actually? Because it's an interesting thing.
So there's some clients, and there's a developer I work for that specifically instructed me not to do photorealistic renderings because the client does sit there with it afterwards. And if the contractor had to make something work, or it just didn't 100% come out like the easy 3D modeling is making it. It means it's a lot easier to do it there versus building it in reality. Concrete kicks out a little, something doesn't always look 100% the same. So the idea, and for those clients, we definitely stick to a more, I wouldn't say animated, but less photorealistic. It's got some sort of drawing character to it, which from that, as being a requirement from a developer, I've grown to like. It's my stylistic representation of what we're going to do. So I think giving them the final product or too finished and polished makes it done. If you give them this illustration, they still need to be imagining what the space is going to be, and you need them to be imagining. You need the client to be building this dwelling, this home, in their minds as much as what you are while you're doing it. And I think as soon as you give them a final, complete product, that's what they see, and they expect it to just be that. The less room for imagination, and then maybe it hinders the design, or it stops there. It's not going to go any further.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so you need to keep the imagination alive in them as well, which is also then interesting, because if we then develop the tools better, like you said, sending them a 3D model for them to kind of rotate and inspect themselves and stuff like that, would it then be valuable for you to still do more of an artist impression, a stylized version of that, rather than the actual photo textured kind of representation?
Definitely. I think the stylistic, I mean, the best way to be doing that is a drawing, to illustrate that thing in your own imagination, pen to paper, has a certain character and quality to it that a client can appreciate and enjoy far more than just a computer generated and programmed out this perfect lined straight thing.
Yeah, it just seems like there must be such a cautious approach to conveying an idea, but not to show that final product, like you said. And it'll be interesting going forward now, if the technology is available for us to virtually walk through our exact house. Would you want to show your client?
Which is there. I mean, that technology is already there.
And it does exist, but would you then, do you think that would be embraced? Or would it actually have to be pulled back into a stylistic visual, so that you can still kind of present the final product when it actually exists? Would you want your client to walk through their final house in full virtual reality, photorealistic?
Yes, actually. Yeah, 100%. Because at that point, there'd be no surprises. There'd be no part of that house we get to on site, and they're like, oh, I thought that was going to be different. Because that is a difficulty, that is the communication difficulty that I have in my industry. That's the only one, really. It's like, oh, I thought that was going to be a little different, because that's what you're doing. You're convincing them of an idea that you formulated in your head so well, and you need them to formulate it in their heads. And just the miscommunication of, oh, their picture that they painted isn't exactly the same as the one that you've painted. And if once you're able to use complete 3D walkthroughs that shows that client exactly what it is, they've signed up for it. They know exactly what they're getting. There would probably be a lot less, oh, can we come up with another plan during construction? Can we fix this? Can we change that? Can we make this a little bit bigger? And a lot of the time when I've been involved in projects like that, where that's happened, where clients got on site and like, oh, this bedroom, I think we just half a meter, which is an insignificant amount, to be honest. It affects the emotional feeling of that space, but they just want that half a meter. Now they got to go recast the foundation half a meter wide, they got to extend the roof. Those costs work up way more than the value that you're getting in that little half a meter extra. So yes, I would love a client to be able to walk through 100% exactly what they are going to see, because they would have no uncertainties. But in the same breath, it is nice for them to trust you, and you lead them into the design process.
Like I said, the one takeaway for me here was we all craft things, so we're forced to focus on details, but then once a client focuses on a detail too precisely, we need to widen their view.
They lose sight of the bigger thing. Yeah, because that's the thing that's hard about this. Lots of little things. Everything is connected to this bigger picture, and that's what anyone sees when they drive past the house on the side of the street. But there's all these little intricate things that have to be connected. So you need to keep them looking. This is your house. This is your house, and I'm trying to figure out all the little things in between that make it work.
And I think in a lot of other fields, more digital fields, it's not as tangible. So people don't realize the effect that one decision has on design or on how you communicate something.
Yeah, I can literally explain it to them if I wanted to. I can go through the little details of it if I need to.
And I think that's so valuable that that they can physically see the repercussions of a decision or of a communication about a specific one thing. I think that's a really valuable takeaway out of your communication.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for chatting, dude.
Thanks a lot for tuning in. I hope that was as insightful for you as it was for me. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll chat soon.